Let's break down the surprising election results. This is the Issues Watch podcast. Hi, I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the Issues Watch podcast. Well, it's finally over, and the results are in. Donald Trump won a clear victory in the presidential race and will assume the presidency for the second time in January. Here with us today to give us his insights on what happened and where we may be headed is Dr. Ben Dworkin, who's the director of Rowan Institute for Public Policy. Welcome back, Ben.
It's good to be back, Jeff.
Okay, we're really happy to have you. So, President-elect Trump won a solid victory, taking the popular vote and the electoral college. He did better than expected with many voter groups and won all the battleground states that have been called and will probably win the other two. I should point out that it's November 7th, so it is 2 days after the election. The House of Representatives has not been decided yet, and the two battleground states of Nevada and Arizona, final results are not in, though it is leaning towards Donald Trump. So, additionally, Trump even came close in New Jersey, a solid blue state. So, Ben, give us your insights on what happened.
What happened on election day was stunning. It was significant. It was historic. But as we get into this discussion, we need a couple caveats. First, it's early. We really don't know all the reasons why everything happened as it did. Lots of folks like me will offer you various theories and ideas, and all of this might be partially right. But we're going to be taking over the next few months some time to really look at the data, to go back to the exit polls, to go poll the people who voted, and to find out more. The other thing to remember, there's this rhetorical question in political science. And the question is, how heavy is the straw that breaks the camel's back? The answer is, it's as heavy as every other straw. And what we're saying when we use this question and answer is that it's never one thing. There's never one straw that determines the winner. And so historians will go back and point to this interview or that strategy or this quirk of fate, but a lot of these things all contributed to what we saw. Now, that having been said, let me offer a couple things I think we do know. First of all, to their credit, the Trump campaign continues to find underappreciated pockets of voters. And they're able to mobilize them and to get them the polls for the Trump campaign. What are we talking about? In 2016, these were the voters in rural counties and the flyover states, the people that were not on the coast, the forgotten people. The Trump folks went out, talked to them, mobilized them, got them energized, and it was a huge surge in people that we really didn't expect to vote in that presidential election. Now we have to read Hillbilly Elegy and we have to read all these books about those folks. That was 2016. Now this time in 2024, we have working class men. And when we say working class men, we're talking about a category of voters, non-college educated males. And the Trump campaign went out to them, spoke to them, got on every podcast from Joe Rogan on down that reached out to them. These are folks who are playing Fortnite and other online games. And a lot of us didn't think that they really voted. But Trump found them, mobilized them, got them. And that's one of the big reasons why I think we saw the results we did. A couple other things to mention about this election. Society and its discontents. The fact is, people remain very frustrated, very angry. They're demanding something better than whatever they're getting. We have a supply side problem in politics. What we are offering to the American people writ large is unsatisfying. It's dysfunctional. It is disappointing. It is slow. It's complicated. And I think this is one of the reasons why this has really been accentuated and exacerbated this problem, the supply side problem, over the last 25, 30 years. We have seen continually, after long periods of stability and who was controlling the House, we go back and forth every couple terms. Now, people keep throwing folks out. And this is why you elect somebody like Donald Trump in 2016, throw him out in 2020, and then throw the Democrats out in 2024. So there's just that anger that is in the electorate. Third of the four things that I just want to bring up here, I think in the end, Donald Trump was the change. The Biden administration has particularly low approval ratings, deservedly or not. And Kamala Harris went out and said, "Turn the page. I am the change." And in many ways, because she's a woman, because she's a woman of color, she was change. But I think a lot of folks in the end clearly identified her with the Biden administration, which is unpopular. So when she said turn the page, they voters went out and said, "You're the page, and we're turning past you and the Biden administration." And finally, we just have to understand how significant we are looking at a new Republican Party. Trump has changed the party, not just in his own image. It's not just the party has changed, the country has changed. And he has pulled votes from here and there. It's a working class party, it's an anti elite party that values directness and just get it done and leave me alone kind of attitudes. The Democrats are left increasingly wealthy party. Yes, they still represent significant pockets of the lower quarter percentile in terms of American voters and when you grade them by income. But at the same time, wealthy and wealthier people are voting Democratic. More college educated people are voting Democratic. And so you have this reconfiguration, this realignment of the political parties. And that's something I think is going to last for a while. So I'll stop there.
Ben, thank
There's more to talk about, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, we could actually, I'm sure, talk for hours on this. But so let's look at issues for a moment. Putting aside the overarching political environment that you just spoke about, what were in your mind the defining issues? Was it the economy? Was it immigration, crime? Was it a rejection of the Democrats' embrace of what's being called progressive issues? What do you think were the key issues?
I think each side had their own issues, and that motivated them in a different way. So on the Republican side, you clearly had the economy. Despite it getting better, it was not, voters wanted to hold somebody responsible for the fact that, butter costs way more than it used to, and eggs as well. Um, you had immigration, which interestingly, I think when we look back, when historians look back at this, they'll say immigration became something beyond a border state issue um,
Yes.
because of this, what might have been considered a political stunt, but ended up having significant political benefit, where you had border state governors like Abbott in Texas and DeSantis in Florida putting anybody they found who was an undocumented immigrant, putting them on a bus and sending them to cities. And so suddenly, Chicago and New York said, all right, we'll embrace the immigrants because that's what we believe in, right? And then they had issues when you start packing people into hotel rooms, because then that's the kind of social situation, social scientists have always found breeds crime. So now it touches on the crime issue. And you had, particularly places like Chicago, where they just had a flood of immigrants. The reason we were talking about Springfield, Illinois was not because of the very legal and had nothing to do with this shipping them away situation. But any number of smaller communities were suddenly being taken in, uh, transformed in certain ways by a flood of immigrants. And so the border and immigration issue was brought to the front door, quite literally, of northern, very democratic cities, and they didn't particularly handle it well. And I think that turned a lot of working class folks very against immigration, which they have opinions on in theory and then opinions on in reality. Um, so that was a big issue. And then crime became an issue. You know, the crime, the statistics are going down. But the fact is that what we've seen is that when you talk to the folks, at the New Jersey Food Council, and you say, who represent all of the supermarkets in New Jersey, what's your biggest problem? Theft. Theft is
Hmm.
the biggest problem that they have. It's not workforce. It's not anything else. It's theft. Um, and every time anybody who has had to go and get a clerk to open up a shelf so that you can get deodorant or razors, understands. I mean, that's, as my friend Jennifer Holdsworth Karp pointed out. She goes, "That's a walking ad. It's a ready-made ad right there for Republicans. Every time you have to press a button, someone from CVS has to come and open a thing so that you can access it, because it just means people don't feel that crime is not an issue. They're looking at it like, look at all these protections we now have to do." Um, and then you have just, as part of crime, you just have all the things that Democrats did that hurt their brand over the last few years. The idea of defund the police has got to go down as one of the most incomprehensibly stupid slogans in American political history. Um, it was it was dumb to begin with. It's not good policy. And the people who opposed it were the people of color, that everybody, that
Right.
lots of these folks who were doing it were trying to tell you that, oh no, this is what is good. Bail reform has not particularly worked. And I know a lot of folks, who work very hard to get it. And it can be an extremely unfair system. People waiting months for a small crime to get in front of a court because they can't pay the bail to get out, and therefore they can't work, and therefore their kids can't go to school, and all these other things. But it also drove up people's perception of crime. So those are the big things: crime, immigration, the economy for the Republicans. For the Democrats, it was clearly democracy and abortion. Um, right now, as happens when you lose an election, that a lot of people went in thinking that the Democrats were in a good shape to win this. There is tremendous amount of Democratic finger pointing, and the finger pointing addresses, conveniently, the issue that I told you to talk about. You didn't talk about enough, and therefore it's become a problem. That's why you lost. And you see this with Gaza and the war with Israel. There are folks who said, it was because you should have embraced it. You should have cut off Israel from military aid. It's because you didn't let anybody from this, with this perspective, speak at the convention. That's why you lost. And at the same time, you have people who are coming and yelling at the Democrats. Again, everybody who was part of the decision making process. The reason you lost is because you didn't go out and take a stand against these kids who were blowing off class, protesting, preventing other people from protesting, occupying buildings, preventing others from attending classes, all while they went to their $75,000 a year university. You should have attacked them and said, no, that's wrong. So you have contrary people jumping out and talking about issues, but the things that really motivated Democrats this year were abortion and democracy.
So Ben, focusing on the battleground states for a moment, and you have addressed this to some extent, but why and how did Trump do so well? And was Harris's poor showing, do you think and I guess I mean poor showing with key swing voter groups, do you think that was due to an anti-Harris or a pro-Trump sentiment?
There are a couple of things that we we can now say we have a sense of sort of what happened. But whether that last part of your question, whether it was a pro-Trump or anti-Harris vote, we just don't know. And so, it's hard to reduce this to an either or kind of situation. Like I said, a lot of things were going on. There was a red wave, clearly. And while the Democrats invested a lot, and certainly much more than the Republicans, in the ground game, in the effort to go knock on doors and call people and text people, etc., it held back a little bit, but it wasn't enough. In the end, the wave overcame whatever efforts the Democrats had. Another point, Trump is clearly acceptable to a vast number of Americans who might not want their kid to grow up and be Donald Trump, but they're not voting on whether their kid grows up to have the character of Donald Trump. Character wasn't the defining issue. You also had in the media this wasn't always an issue with voters. This was an issue with Democratic talking heads who often veered into patronizing dismissal. How can black men be doing this? They would decry. And who raised these people, where they would vote for someone who is clearly a fascist, authoritarian, and just denies all the fundamental values of America. If you're trying to convince people to vote for you, calling them stupid, ignorant, and un-American is not necessarily a way to do it. And I think well-intentioned pundits had a problem with that. You saw a continuing erosion in the belief in elites. Smart people who we should be listening to were not trusted anymore. And that includes the generals who came out and said, I worked with Donald Trump. That guy is a fascist. That guy is an authoritarian. It's not that they were or were not wrong. It's that people didn't believe them. People don't trust them in the same way. And finally, let me just point out, I think, when we talk about the realignment of these parties and the electorate in terms of who identifies where, the Democrats are seen as the party that, because they're nice and they won't call BS. Again, we talk about the Gaza protests. The people who didn't call it out, the party that doesn't say, hey, enough of this, you guys are acting incorrectly here, because they didn't want to offend somebody, because they didn't want to do that. I think, again, it was, I don't know how important in rural Wisconsin, the issue of Israel and Gaza is to the average voter. But when the Democrats don't call it out, I think it hurt the Democratic brand in those battleground states.
So Ben, one of the big surprises, I think, at least it was for me, is how well Donald Trump did in New Jersey. I think the governor is still in a state of shock. So tell us, why was it so close in New Jersey?
Well, again, I keep saying we're going to learn more. This is all sort of a very early analysis. But clearly, a lot of Republicans voted. When we had our 10 days in New Jersey, our 10 days of early in-person voting, Donald Trump switched from what he has been saying for over a decade, which was don't trust it, vote on election day. And somebody finally convinced him to tell his folks, go out and vote in person, go to your town hall, wherever it's going to be, in person, vote during these 10 days. Now, there's a huge strategic benefit to that, because it's sort of, you're banking votes, then you only have to worry about fewer people on election day. What a lot of us, and I will put myself in this category, thought and perceived this not as a sign of a red wave, but as a sign of a shift. Okay, people who used to vote on election day are now voting 10 days before election day. It's not like there's more Republicans. We thought it's just a shift, and we were wrong. Fact is, more Republicans came out on election day too. And so it was a sign of a red wave. We didn't read it that way when it was happening. So that was one reason why I think we saw the numbers in New Jersey. The other reason was a real uh, uh, dramatic shift in support for Democrats by the Hispanic community. In
Mm.
Passaic County, in Hudson County, counties that have significant Hispanic populations, we're talking about issues. I've seen early numbers where what used to be a 75-25 split in favor of the Democrats went to 50-50. And that is because there's so many in those particular areas, that was a huge shift. I do not think the Democrats have any real understanding about why that happened just yet. And as much as anybody wants to put out a theory, we're going to have to test it. And the way things get tested are that very reputable groups like the Pew Center in Washington and others go out and they find the people who they start polling people who voted. And they'll find people with Hispanic surnames living in these districts and they'll ask them. You can have focus groups. Certainly, the Democrats will do this in order to find out why. So those are two big reasons. I think we saw much closer races in New Jersey than anyone expected, even though the final results were largely what everybody had predicted in the first place.
Great, thank you, Ben. So let me ask you one last question, which I think is particularly important to our members, CPAs, and that is, what impact do you think the Trump presidency will have on tax and business issues?
Okay, I think it's going to be dramatic. I think the kinds of things you have to look for. Um, there's a bunch of them here, probably. So I think there's going to be a real threat to the Fed's independence. Um, One of the things that has made the United States different from a lot of others is the way the elected government deals with the central bank. Um, People can be disappointed. I wish they would have lowered rates. I wish they would have raised rates at a certain point in time. But you can say something in the press, and that's about it. Now we're talking about there may well be much that line, that bright line that has divided and kept the Fed's independence from the elected class, a very strong dividing line, that's going to be weakened under this next Trump administration. So that's going to have tremendous effects on monetary policy and therefore the overall economy. Tariffs, something that Trump has talked about. I think they're very likely. I think what we know from the first Trump administration that he is very transactional. And so tariffs might be ready to be imposed on any number of different countries. But if you're China, you can buy your way out of it. Um, promise to buy, $20 billion in, or $1 trillion for that matter, in American grain, and then we won't give you the tariffs. That's the kind of thing. So then suddenly you've got huge foreign investment in America, um, but they get out of the tariffs. I don't know if Mexico is going to be able to do that if tariffs are imposed there. So we'll have to sort of see how it plays out. Tariffs are going to be proposed, but there's going to be, I would expect to see these kind of backroom negotiations. The cutoff of migrant labor, right? We fully expect at this point, given the prominence of the issue, they're going to, if not a wall, they're just going to put everybody in line and just, they're going to stop everything they can, anyone from coming across the border without proper documentation. Um, so what happens when you do that? Well, there's less migrant labor. And when there's less migrant labor, there are going to be plants, and produce and agriculture products that can't be picked up in time. So they're going to rot on the vine because there aren't enough people to go out there and to pick the grapes and to pick the apples and to pick the oranges and everything else that needs to be done. So suddenly you're going to continue to see higher prices because of the labor shortage. And then finally, this is one of the extreme things that Trump has talked about. But when you have people like Stephen Miller, and you won the election, so you can put people like him in charge, how are you going to round up 10 million people put them in internment camps, separate them from their families. Some of them have been here for decades. They have families, they pay taxes. How do you take them out of the house, put them in an intern camp, and ship them across the border? That, forget about just how that physically gets done. I think it's going to affect the economy because somebody is going to be some good employee that you had. Or now there's going to be a single parent when there were two parents, which means the kids can't go to school, which means they get in trouble. I mean, there are ripple effects for these kinds of social and immigration enforcement policies that we're going to have to be prepared for under the next 4 years.
One last question related to that, Ben, is what do you think is going to happen, if anything, with the SALT cap deduction?
Look, if the Republicans imposed it under the first Trump administration, I seriously doubt they're going to get rid of it. They didn't get rid of it then. I don't think they particularly care for New Jersey and New York, which are places that where this is a major issue. So I don't think anybody should expect that to be eliminated anytime soon.
Great. Well, Ben, once again, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you, and I'm
Always.
sure we will have you back soon.
I look forward to it, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening or watching. For legislative news and information, visit njcpa.org/advocacy.